My girlfriend said he needed space for a month, then I accidentally became friends with his secret boyfriend. My name is Chris, and for 2 years I thought I understood my relationship with my girlfriend Amanda better than anything else in my life. Turns out I understood almost nothing. Amanda and I met in college in a shared elective neither of us particularly cared about and started dating not long after. We moved in together about a year after graduating, into a small two-bedroom apartment we could barely afford but loved anyway, the kind of place where you learn every creak in the floor and every quirk of the water heater within the first month. Things were good, or at least they seemed good. She worked long hours as a nurse, rotating between day and night shifts that never quite lined up with my own schedule and we made it work the way a lot of couples do, leaving notes on the counter, texting throughout the day, treasuring the overlapping hours we did get. About a year into living together, Amanda started acting distant. Nothing dramatic at first, just small things I chalked up to work stress. She'd take calls in the other room, closing the bedroom door behind her in a way she never used to. She started going to the gym at odd hours, sometimes as late as 10 at night, coming home flushed and quiet. When I asked too many questions about her day, she'd get defensive in a way that felt disproportionate to whatever I'd actually asked. I remember one night I asked, mostly out of curiosity, who she'd been on the phone with for so long, and she snapped at me that she was allowed to have friends without reporting every conversation back to me. I backed off after that. I didn't want to be the kind of boyfriend who made his girlfriend feel monitored. When I brought the distance up more directly, she always had an explanation ready. Stress at work, she said, a rough patch with a coworker. Needing her own time after years of us being together constantly since college. Feeling suffocated, she admitted once, by how much time we spent together now that we lived in the same small apartment. I took that one hard, though I tried not to show it. I told myself long relationships go through phases like this, that needing space didn't automatically mean something was wrong underneath it. And one night, maybe 6 weeks after that conversation, she sat me down on the couch with a look on her face I hadn't seen before and told me she needed space. Real space this time, not just an evening alone, not a breakup, she insisted quickly, catching the panic that must have shown on my face, just some distance to figure some things out about herself, about us, about what she actually wanted. She suggested I stay at my brother Ryan's place for a month while she had the apartment to herself to think. I was hurt, confused, and honestly a little relieved all at once, which is a strange combination of feelings to sit with. Hurt, obviously, because 2 years in I thought we were building towards something permanent, not drifting apart in ways I hadn't fully noticed. Confused because she still wouldn't tell me what exactly needed figuring out. But relieved too, in a small, guilty way, because at least she was being somewhat honest that something was wrong, even if she wouldn't say what. The alternative, pretending everything was fine while it clearly wasn't, felt worse than a month of uncertainty. I moved in with my brother Ryan for what was supposed to be a short break, packing a duffel bag like I was leaving for a business trip instead of an indefinite exile from my own apartment. Ryan didn't ask too many questions, which I appreciated at the time, just cleared out his spare room and told me to stay as long as I needed. During that month, I started going to a local climbing gym a few blocks from his place, mostly just to get out of the house and clear my head instead of doom-scrolling on his couch every night wondering what Amanda was doing back home. That's where I met a guy named Marcus. We ended up on adjacent routes one evening, both of us clearly beginners, both of us falling off the wall in increasingly embarrassing ways, and started laughing about it between attempts. We hit it off immediately, same dry sense of humor, same taste in terrible action movies, same complete inability to climb anything above a beginner route without falling on our faces and pretending it was intentional. We started climbing together 2 or 3 times a week after that first night and grabbing food afterward, usually burgers at a cheap place near the gym that stayed open late. For the first couple weeks, our conversations stayed light. Work complaints, movie recommendations, the usual stuff two new friends talk about while they're still figuring each other out. Climbing together a few times a week has a way of building trust faster than you'd expect, maybe because you're literally trusting the other person to spot you, to catch your fall, to tell you honestly whether your form looks dangerous before you break something. By the third week, we'd started opening up a bit more. About 3 weeks in, Marcus and I were talking over burgers, picking at a shared basket of fries, when he mentioned he'd recently been going through a rough patch with someone he was seeing. Long-distance feeling relationship, he said, even though they technically lived in the same city. Lots of secrecy on his partner's end. A partner who kept disappearing for stretches at a time, evenings, sometimes whole weekends, and wouldn't explain where or why beyond vague excuses about needing space or dealing with personal stuff. Something about the description felt oddly familiar as he talked, the phrasing almost identical to what Amanda had said to me weeks earlier, but I didn't think much of it beyond a passing thought. Coincidences happen. Relationships hit rough patches in similar ways all the time. I offered the kind of generic sympathy you offer a new friend without much context, and we moved on to talking about whether his climbing shoes were actually a size too small, which they clearly were. Then Marcus pulled out his phone to show me a photo from a trip he'd taken a few months back, laughing about how badly he'd sunburned on that trip, some lake house rental he described in detail, the dock, the ridiculous inflatable flamingo, the fact that the Wi-Fi barely worked the entire weekend. He turned his phone toward me so I could see the burn properly. And there in the photo behind him, standing near the water with a drink in her hand, unmistakably, was Amanda. I stared at the screen for a solid 10 seconds before I said anything, my brain refusing to process what I was looking at fast enough to form words. Marcus noticed my face change, the color probably draining out of it in real time, and asked what was wrong, half joking that I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I turned my own phone around without saying anything and showed him a picture of Amanda and me from a trip we'd taken together the previous summer, my arm around her at a restaurant we went to for her birthday, both of us grinning at whoever was holding the camera. Marcus went pale, the same way I imagined my own face had gone a few seconds earlier. He looked at his phone, then at mine, then back at his own, like he was hoping the photo would rearrange itself into something less damning. Then he set his burger down very slowly, wiped his hands on a napkin with unnecessary care, like he needed something to do with his hands while his brain caught up, and said, "Okay, we need to actually talk." It turned out Amanda had been seeing Marcus for almost 8 months. He knew she had a partner. He'd assumed we'd broken up months earlier because that's exactly what Amanda had told him, apparently in fairly convincing detail, complete with a story about how we'd grown apart and were basically just roommates at that point. Meanwhile, she'd told me she just needed space to figure herself out, no mention of anyone else at all. We'd both been lied to in completely different directions for months, fed two entirely different versions of the same relationship, and somehow, through the most absurd coincidence imaginable, we'd become genuine friends without either of us having any idea. We sat in that burger place for almost 2 hours after that, long past when the food had gone cold, piecing together the timeline together like two detectives comparing notes on the same case. Every gym trip at odd hours lined up with something Marcus remembered. Every phone call taken behind a closed door matched something he could place on his end, too. Every weekend she claimed to be picking up extra shifts at the hospital turned out to correspond suspiciously well with weekends Marcus remembered spending with her. It all lined up with sickening precision. Neither of us wanted to be the one to break the news over text, and honestly, neither of us fully trusted the other not to be lying about something too, at least not yet. So we agreed to confront her together in person and see for ourselves. We showed up at the apartment, my apartment, technically still, even though I hadn't set foot in it in weeks, the next evening. Amanda opened the door already smiling, dressed like she'd been expecting a nice night in, probably assuming I was there to talk about getting back together after our month apart. Her face when she saw Marcus standing next to me is something I don't think I'll ever forget for the rest of my life. She didn't even try to explain, not at first. She just stood there in the doorway, completely frozen, one hand still on the door handle, looking back and forth between the two of us like her brain genuinely couldn't process what her eyes were showing her. It took her almost a full minute to say anything at all, and when she finally did, it wasn't an apology, it was just my name, said in this small, stunned voice like she was hoping saying it would somehow undo what was standing in front of her. I moved my things out for good over the next few days, taking my time with it, not out of sentimentality, but because I genuinely didn't want to be in the same room as her longer than necessary. Ryan let me stay with him for another couple months while I found a new place, and honestly, having Marcus around during that stretch made the whole thing feel almost bearable, two guys navigating the same betrayal from opposite angles, occasionally laughing at how absurd the whole situation was even while it hurt. Amanda tried calling and texting for a couple weeks afterward, throwing out every excuse in the book. She was confused. She loved us both in different ways. She didn't know how to end things cleanly with either of us and kept putting it off, hoping the problem would somehow resolve itself. I didn't respond to any of it. There wasn't really anything left to say that 2 months of lies hadn't already answered for her. Marcus and I, oddly enough, stayed close after everything settled. We still climb together most weekends, still argue about which action movies actually hold up, still grab burgers at that same place even though neither of us can walk past it without at least mentioning the night everything fell apart there. There's something almost funny now in hindsight about how we met, going through the exact same heartbreak from two completely different directions at the exact same time, discovering it together over cheap burgers and cold fries, and coming out the other side as genuinely good friends instead of enemies competing over the wreckage. People ask sometimes if it's weird that my closest friend these days is the guy my girlfriend was cheating with. Honestly, it isn't, not anymore. We didn't do anything wrong to each other. We were both just trying to figure out why the person we trusted kept disappearing on us, feeding us the same vague excuses dressed up in slightly different language, and somehow, through the strangest possible coincidence, we found the answer in each other at exactly the same time. If anything, going through it together made it easier to move past, because I never had to explain the whole mess to someone who wasn't already living inside it too. Looking back now, there were 100 small signs I brushed past because I didn't want to believe them. The way Amanda started keeping her phone face down on the counter, something she'd never done before. The way she'd laugh a little too quickly at questions about her schedule, like she'd rehearsed the answer before she ever had to say it out loud to me. Even the space conversation itself, if I really think about it, wasn't about figuring herself out at all. It was about clearing the apartment for a month so she could have Marcus over without any risk of me walking in. I didn't put that together until much later, sitting with Ryan one night going over the whole timeline again, and the realization made me feel something close to sick. She hadn't been confused. She'd been managing two relationships like a scheduling problem, and I'd been the one she trusted to just quietly disappear for a month without asking too many questions. Ryan, for his part, felt guilty for a while about not noticing anything was wrong sooner, even though there was nothing for him to notice. Amanda had never given him a reason to suspect anything either. He'd always liked her, actually, thought she was good for me, which made the whole thing sting a little more when it finally came out. He kept apologizing for not seeing it, and I kept telling him there was nothing to see because she'd been careful, methodical even, about keeping her two lives separated. It wasn't sloppiness that gave her away in the end. It was pure, absurd coincidence, the kind of thing you couldn't plan for even if you tried. Marcus and I talked a lot in the weeks afterward about how differently we'd each experienced the same 8 months. He'd meet Amanda for dinners on nights I thought she was working late shifts at the hospital, nights I now know she'd swapped with coworkers for reasons I never questioned at the time, because why would I? He described a version of her that sounded, in a lot of ways, like the version I'd fallen for 2 years earlier: attentive, funny, quick to make plans, quick to remember small details about your day. It was strange and a little disorienting to hear someone else describe the early version of a relationship I recognized so well, except every date he mentioned lined up with a night I'd spent alone in our apartment, assuming she really was at work. There was a stretch of a few weeks where I genuinely didn't know how to feel about any of it, some mix of anger and humiliation, and a weird kind of relief that at least now I understood why things had felt so off for so long. Ryan kept telling me in his usual blunt way that I'd dodged something a lot worse than a bad breakup. I'd dodged years of not knowing, of building a life with someone who was capable of running 2 entire relationships in parallel without either of us noticing until a lake house photo gave it away. He wasn't wrong, but it still took time to actually feel the truth of that instead of just hearing it. Manda eventually stopped reaching out altogether, sometime around the 2-month mark, after her messages went from apologetic to defensive to, near the end, almost accusatory, like somehow the two of us finding out together and staying close afterward was the part that had wronged her. I heard through a mutual friend months later that she'd moved to a different city for a fresh start, which didn't surprise me. It's hard to stay somewhere everyone eventually finds out exactly what you did. These days, my new apartment is about 10 minutes from the climbing gym where Marcus and I met, which feels almost poetic given how the whole thing started. We've got a standing Tuesday and Saturday climbing schedule now, plus burgers afterward more often than either of our doctors would probably recommend. He's since started seeing someone new, a guy from his office who seems steady and kind in a way that makes me quietly relieved for him, and I've slowly started putting myself back out there too, though I'll admit I'm a lot more attentive now to the kind of small inconsistencies I used to wave away without a second thought. If there's a lesson in any of it, I think it's less about trust in a general sense and more about listening to that quiet, uncomfortable feeling when something doesn't add up, instead of talking yourself out of it because the alternative feels too painful to consider. I ignored that feeling for months. Marcus ignored a version of it too on his end. Neither of us wanted to be the person who blew up a relationship over a suspicion we couldn't prove. In the end, we didn't have to be. The proof found us on its own in the most unlikely way possible, over a shared basket of fries in a burger place neither of us will ever be able to walk past again without laughing, just a little, at how strange life can actually be.